Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's top business interviews. And this is a first to not be doing it face-to-face or not be doing it face-to-face at massive 2 and 3 meter distances as we have been doing because of COVID. But my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Phil Rubel, who has escaped Japan before we could get together and do the interview and has relocated to Canada. And he's actually joining us there on Zoom. So it's morning here for me, but it's late afternoon, early evening for you there. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Greg. How are you? It's a beautiful day in Victoria here, and I wish you were here looking at the mountain view with me.
Sounds good. So Phil is now, I say, when I first met Phil, he was running Saatchi Saatchi, but he's now back in Canada. He's an adjunct professor, executive in residence, and was it the Gunnison, which was it, Gunnison School?
Gustafson School of Business for University of Victoria.
Yeah, Gustafson School, University of Victoria. And also you have an advisory now. What was the name of that advisory again?
Yeah, it's a boutique advisory called Sparrow Advisory.
Sparrow Advisory. So that's what we're doing today. But, Phil, you spent, how many years were you in Japan altogether?
Well, first came to Japan in 1997. It was supposed to be for a couple of years and stayed for 3, then moved to Chicago for a couple of years, then came back and was there up until last month.
So altogether, how many years has that been?
Over 20 years.
Wow. So a long time. But you finally moved back to Canada. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. But how was it that you came to Japan in the first place to have this? I came for a couple of years, turned into a 20-year career in Japan. Like a lot of people like me, I'm the same. Came for 2, wound up staying 36. Something about this country, isn't there? But what happened? How did you come to Japan? What were you doing when you first got here?
I had always had an interest in Japanese culture and history, and I got into martial arts when I was younger, traditional karate, as you and I have talked many times before about it.
You better tell all the karate folk out there which ruha, which style you're doing.
Shotokan.
Shotokan. I'm still doing Shitoru. So very good. Keep going.
And I got recruited by McCann Erickson, who was having a big issue at the time. They had lost probably their biggest brand assignment from one of their biggest, most famous clients, and they were looking for somebody to help them get it back and to take care of some other business transformation issues.
So you're based in Canada at this time, or state?
I was based in Canada. Yep.
So Phil, why didn't they just get someone in Japan to rescue the client? Why do they need to bring you all the way from Canada to Japan to do that?
I think it was just a nice happenstance that they were looking for, McCann being a very large, global group and part of IPG was looking for global talent for any number of assignments. And at that time, Japan had a particular need, and they reached out to me, happened to be in Canada, and they talked to me about the Japanese assignment. So for me, because of my interest in Japan, I was very motivated to take them up on it.
Yeah, and what year was that again?
1997.
1997. Okay. And so that started, and then how long were you there? And you were basically looking after the client. You weren't in a leadership role at that point, I take it.
I was senior vice president and manager of one of their divisions.
Okay.
And I had some really big global clients like Coca-Cola and L'Oreal and a few others, and helped bring MasterCard on board, and also some more local clients as well, or some smaller businesses. So it was a pretty good team all around.
So I guess at that point, I don't know how much Japanese you spoke. You probably knew Gyakuzuki and Moshigiri and these sorts of...
Anything in a dojo was okay, but unless I was looking to pick a fight with somebody, rather useless.
Yeah. So here you are. You don't speak Japanese, but you've got an interest in Japan. You're running a team. Presumably you're Japanese in it as well. So what was it like, that first experience of leading a team in Japan? Because presumably you'd led teams before you got to Japan.
Oh, yeah. I was running my own advertising agency in Japan that I co-founded for coming on to 9 years. So I was used to being in a leadership role. Coming to Japan, and also the scale of the business was quite different than what I was working on before. So that was one surprise. And then, of course, just doing business in Japan was, and particularly at that time, so completely different from most other markets around the world. So
you said
nice.
You co-founded an agency prior to coming with McCann, is that right?
Yeah, I began my career on the client side with Sharing Plow, Big Pharma,
Mm-hmm.
and I went through marketing and new business licensing and acquisition, and then went to the agency side and worked in strategic planning and account management for a period of time, and then eventually realized that it would be more fun to actually start my own business. And my creative director and I, who we met at this particular agency, we got together and started our own agency. And
This is in Japan.
This was in Canada.
Oh, in Canada. Sorry, in Canada.
And then and then, like I said, after about 9 years, I got recruited by McCann.
Right, gotcha. So how would you compare? You've been running your own agency in Canada. Now you're running a team in Japan. What were some of the challenges you found? I mean, talk about scale as one of them, but apart from scale.
Well, again, I think things evolve over time. So my experience then isn't necessarily as relevant as it is today as it would have been even, say, 10 years ago. But one of the issues was Japan at that time was just getting used to the fact that the bubble had burst. It had burst, of course, years before, but things sort of moved slowly, and they were just realizing it. And the idea of engaging with global management practices, global leadership practices, international ways of doing business was still, there was a good deal of hesitancy, I think, both on the client side in some ways and also on the agency side. So that took a lot of stick handling, if you pardon the Canadian hockey reference, to be able to get people to put aside what they think the way they think they should be doing things, and start looking at things with a fresh eye.
So how you're leading a Japanese team, how do you get them to look at things with a fresh eye? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a bit different, as I pointed out, it's a bit different then than it is now, but still I think a lot of the root issues are the same, which is people aren't used to thinking fresh ideas and going down fresh directions completely on their own, and then selling them to management or to other team members or to a client. They were more used to being told what to do and then executing. Versus where I was coming from after working in Canada and a bit in the US is a business where people are always coming to you with what's new and what's different and wanting to push something new. And from a leadership point of view, you quite often had to slow them down a little bit and say, okay, let's experiment with this, let's think this through, and all that sort of thing. And then further modify and develop, and then eventually implement. In Japan, it was the other way around. At least at that time, it was how to cajole people into doing things that they haven't been done before. And when you're a new leader in Japan, especially a foreign leader, it's very easy for the experienced managers on your team to pull you aside, and they mean well, and they say, well, that's not the way we do things here, and try to explain how you should do things. And if you end up doing that, then nothing changes. So I think one of the challenges for any new manager to Japan is to determine how to instigate a change without being revolutionary and more evolutionary.
Okay. So how long are you at McCann then?
I was there for about a year and a half. Okay. And then I got recruited by Darcy to be their CEO. That was DMB&B. And I took over that agency. And then about just over a year into that, I was all set to start making some acquisitions and add some scale to the business. And I went to New York with a business plan in my arm, and the global CEO was listening to my plan, and I could see his eyes were starting to glaze over a little bit. I thought, maybe I'm not doing something very well. And he said, that's really interesting, Philip, but let's put that aside for a second. Here's what we want you to do. We're going to merge Leo Burnett and Darcy and part of the Dentsu business and put it together and call it Beacon. And we want you to do it. So go back to Japan and get started. And that was basically the marching orders. So that was, I think, an opportunity of a lifetime, because first I'm dealing with putting together three very different agency cultures and two global cultures all into one at the same time. And the Darcy entity of those three was by far the smallest. So I had an even more challenging time to make sure that the Leo Burnetters and the Dentsu people and also the existing Darcy people could all come together and figure out ways of working together.
So, yeah, and it was called Beacon.
That's right.
Right, which is a well-known company here still. And so, well, you've now got how big a team? You've gone from how many people to how many people you would look after?
So the Darcy team at the time was about 130 people, and I believe the Beacon team at that time was about 450.
Whoa, okay. That's a big jump. So how do you go about convincing these people they should listen to this guy here who's only been in Japan a relatively short period of time working for a small company?
So, here we had three company cultures that were very well developed and very strong and all had deep roots. I think if I tried to just blend them together, it wouldn't have worked. And of course, if I had gone, leaned heavily on one or the other two would have been upset. So put the management team together and we reinvented what our culture should be, something specific for Japan that incorporated the international aspects that we had to deal with, and also was true to the Japanese perspective as well.
And for the Japanese teams, they have a lot of pride working for the companies they've joined. It's a big deal to join a company in Japan because most people stay with their companies for their entire life. Absolutely. I know when they're joining foreign multinationals or gaishike companies that they understand that it's not quite the same, but their expectations are basically, I'm going to be here for a long time. And then suddenly your company's taken over or merged, or no longer what you joined is no longer where you're working. And so how do you get around assuring people it's going to be okay? We're not going to, go too big and then blow up and fade out like a lot of companies do here. How do you keep them on board with what you're doing here?
Well, again, the root is finding this common culture that everybody can believe in and really well defining what the purpose of the company was. So we managed to do that. Also the people that came over, for example, from Dentsu, were there for a seconded period of time. And some of them would have the choice to stay forever if they wanted. Others would eventually rotate back. So for me, actually, it was to further complicate things. It wasn't just merging the three companies together, but it was also making the shukos, the seconded people, motivated to actually do something and not just sit there, for the 2 or 3 years that they'd be there. And
how did you do that?
So the kind of a funny story, the very first meeting was to have with all of them was in one of our large boardrooms. And I came into the meeting and they were all there and they were all wearing their, really nice navy suits and white shirts and ties. And they had the Dentsu pins on their lapel. And I went into the room and I introduced myself. And on purpose, I wore a polo shirt and jeans. And I said, okay, hi, everybody, and told them who I was. And said, I'd like to start with a little bit of an exercise. And everybody kind of looked at me strangely. I said, I'd like everybody to take their right hand and reach up to their left lapel and take off your pin and put it away for the next 3 years. And let's all think together as Beacon from this day forward. And everybody kind of laughed, and some were a little uncomfortable, but everybody did it. And then that, I think, sort of got everybody to relax a little bit, and then we were able to start the conversations.
It's interesting, they had that definition of the pin, and I'm wearing my Dale Carnegie pin here, which is very common in Japan, and to have a company pin. So, in terms of what are some of the challenges of post merger? Because you do it on paper. Yes, this looks great. The numbers work out. Yes, client spread, this works out. Category spread, this works out. But the reality of actually executing, what were some of the challenges in executing it, particularly through the people? Because it's a creative area. How are you getting the creativity to come from everybody as opposed to just, pockets of people, or maybe only coming out of one of those groups?
So I think a company that large, especially with a triumvirate of organization cultures sort of coming together, it would be impossible to get everybody firing on all pistons all at once. So what you have to do is look for the people that you feel are the most engaged, the most motivated, and get them to help move things along. And I don't just mean in the management team. I mean like throughout the entire hierarchy of the organization. So one was just look for the people that got it and that wanted to do something, and help them make it happen. And then the other is spending an incredible amount of time talking with people on a one-to-one basis, or in very, very small groups, so that they don't feel that there's 5 or 6 layers of management between them and the leaders, and that they have a voice, that they have a say. And quite often, people just want to be heard, and felt that that what they had to say is going to be respected and listened to, and could therefore be part of the decision process. What I think in merger situations, and I've done a few mergers now over the years, one of the biggest issues is people felt like they're just being automatically cut out or ignored or not sort of part of the plan. So so this two-way communication is so essential, to explain in details over and over again. You may think you've explained it properly once or twice or 5 times, but I promise you that's not enough. Do it 10 times, do it 15 times, do it 20 times, and then be very, very open-minded to listening to what people have to say.
Yeah, I also found in Japan, if you start talking to people way down the chain of command, that the people above them get very nervous, particularly Japanese leaders. They don't like it. They think that only they should talk to their subordinates, and you talking to their subordinates, they start to think, is he checking up on me? Is this a cabal? What's going on here? Am I going to be okay? So how did you assure your direct reports that you weren't going around them, but you were actually just trying to understand and help to get the message through?
So, that comes down to a matter of transparency. And anything that you discuss with somebody's team members, you have to make sure that you also explain to them what was discussed. Or if it's a small group, have them in the meeting as well. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing that was going to be said or discussed that all shouldn't hear. This was about the future of the company, the purpose of the organization. It wasn't about HR or any sort of personnel issues.
So you're in the creative business. You've been in the creative business for a long time. When you're in these types of industries, is the object do you have methodologies, brainstorming methodologies, creative methodologies that you apply, or are you just hiring people who, for whatever reason, are just by definition creatives, and you let them go and do the creation? How does that, how does that work?
Sure. Well, first of all, creativity is such a misunderstood phrase, that it's not about being artistic or anything like that. I think everybody should be basically creative, except perhaps accountants. And in almost any business that you're in, you need a creative mind in order to overcome business solutions. So in the advertising world, in the creative department, which is responsible for developing the content for work, they have to be very, very sound strategically in order to really understand what the business problem is, what the issue is, and then also who their stakeholders are, the consumers, and what is it going to do, what is it going to take to put them together. So it's not about wild creativity. It's a disciplined approach. And if you look at, for example, all of the work that's been done in design thinking, which is a very big passion of mine, which is all about experimenting upfront and mitigating risk, but still allowing risk and failure to happen. That design process, in one way or another, is what a good creative team tends to go through upfront. And then by the time it gets to the client, there's usually a lot of process that has gone along the way, a lot of reworking and refining, and in most cases, testing and researching before a piece of content is presented to the client. And then even after the client sees it and approves it, there's a lot of more work to be done to perfect it and take it to the final stage where it's actually released.
Yeah, so you got the dream job there, Phil. So why move? Why I know that industry is constantly recalibrating itself, but that sounded like a fantastic job. So your next job was where?
So my intention at that time was still not to sort of make my career in Japan.
Okay.
So I put the team together, and the largest group globally, and also even from in terms of a people part of that joint venture, was Leo Burnett. So my reporting line changed to LB, and I was invited to Chicago to be executive vice president of account management there. So at that time, I thought, oh, that's it. My Japan tour is over, and I'll head to Chicago. So we moved there, and moved there a little while before 9/11 happened, and stayed until a little while after 9/11 happened. And it was an amazing, tragic, but also an amazing time in America to witness what the country went through. And I got a call one day to come back to Japan. And one thing led to another. And I wound up speaking with one of my advertising heroes, Pat Fallon, founder of Fallon Worldwide. And he and his people were going to start an office in Tokyo, and had two local guys, a team that was ready to be founders, and they were looking for a third partner. And they invited me to be that third partner. So we co-founded Fallon and grew the business. Actually, it was probably the most exciting time to be in an agency startup ever, because we had some really great founding clients, two actually. And then we were able to grow phenomenally quickly within Japan, winning some really big multinational clients. And then eventually I merged the Fallon Worldwide was sold to Publicis Group, which is Leo Burnett and a few others. So I found myself sort of back in the family again. And Saatchi Saatchi was a sister agency. And when you look at the two companies from a global perspective, both are powerhouses in their own respect. Saatchi, really big client, big offices, very famed, very, very storied background. Fallon was more of the outsider agency, more of the outlander that did amazing work, like punched way above its weight. But in reality, it was very few offices around the world, almost like we call ourselves a micro network. We're probably more like a nano network. And Saatchi, meanwhile, had offices almost everywhere. But in Japan, they were struggling. So I had the good fortune to meet Kevin Roberts, who is the global CEO of Saatchi Saatchi, and he and I hit it off. And I came to him with a proposal that, look, we're part of the same family. Why don't we put Saatchi and Fallon together, and it'll be the best of both worlds, because it'll give Saatchi the chance to have an agency that was doing very well in Japan and to go after their two biggest clients, which they had worldwide and did not have in Japan. And Fallon Tokyo would have access to global resources that would really help us and support our business. So he liked the idea. We put it together and founded Saatchi Saatchi Fallon, and we carried on.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So, it's interesting, isn't it, how thinking back to, you come back to Japan, was the Fallon operation actually started and you joined it as a partner, or did you and the other two partners actually, okay, let's go to Japan, let's kick it off? How did that work?
So there were two guys here. They were ex DYR, and they had formed.
DYR, you better explain to people who DYR.
Oh, sorry, Dentsu Young Rubicam. So it's a joint venture between Dentsu and YNR. Mm-hmm. And they left and formed their own company called Graham. And Fallon was introduced to them, but they felt they weren't enough and they needed a third person. And that's where I came in. So the three of us got the company off the ground. Mm-hmm. They had the local existing business. Graham had a couple of connections with some really nice global businesses. Japanese businesses here. And then Fallon was able to bring in a couple of worldwide clients. So it was a really good start. And then we were, because of Fallon's reputation, it opened the doors to a lot of big companies talking to us, both foreign and Gaishke, because Fallon was that famous at that time. And we were able to compete with some really big agencies in Japan and win some really big pieces of business. So
that Fallon degree of fame must have also had an impact on your ability to recruit people, because the talent is what's going to make that work. So was that relatively easy to get people to come and join? Because it's maybe elsewhere it's famous, but Japan, I don't know how famous it was, but how was it getting to be a recruit to come and join?
Yeah, it's, in Japan, it's always tough to get great talent to move from one place or another, because as you pointed out earlier, people tend to stay in one place for their careers. But because of Fallon's fame, I think it at least opened the door to conversations with people that we may not have been able to have with others. And then, things sort of pick up their own just by, success leads to more success. And as we started winning significant pieces of business, more people wanted to become part of that and jump on board.
And what was it like? You've gone from running this mega agency, you're back in the States running a big operation. Now you've got relatively a small operation again. In terms of were there any differences for you the second time around to be leading in Japan compared to the first?
Yeah, I think the principles remain the same. Obviously scale has a big impact into what you can do and how you can do it. But from a leadership perspective, I don't think the principles change all that much. It's about knowing and understanding all the stakeholders. It's about being empathetic and inclusive, and it's also in Japan in particular is showing the way, demonstrating it, not just talking about it, and then also making absolutely sure that any commitments that you make, any promises that you say, that you keep. and that you follow through.
Hmm. And so, Saatchi Saatchi, how long were you running Saatchi Saatchi Fallon? How long was that?
Well, the whole thing was about 13 years.
Right, long time, okay. And so over that period of time, you must have seen quite a few changes in Japan. Did you notice changes in the workforce over that period of time?
Yeah, huge changes. I think perhaps one of the first big changes came after all of a sudden jobs for life started to fall away,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of middle management, people in their 50s who had spent their whole careers with one company. All of a sudden, the company was squeezing them out, and so you saw a lot of disenfranchised people at that time, which had a big impact on the popular culture. At the same time, when that happens, I think it caused a bit of a ripple effect throughout other generations. So young people just finishing school and looking to start jobs, all of a sudden, the number one job that they were interested in wasn't necessarily working for one of the top 10 companies in Japan anymore, because they didn't feel that their security would be there for them forever the way it was for their parents' generation. So they started to rethink things a little bit, and they started to think more about balancing their family life with their work life, which in Japan in the past, especially during bubble time and post-bubble, that wasn't a consideration. So you started to see that kind of change and impact on people's attitude towards work. I think there was a lot of cynicism about corporate Japan and the future of Japan in general. So that led to a lot of changes in the way organizations had to deal with that here.
And I guess you must have bridged the Yutari Sedai, relaxed education period too, where you've got young people coming through who didn't go through the same intensity at high school, particularly. There's not much intensity here going on at university, that's for sure, but certainly at high school. And that tends to have a little bit of a different flavor to it as well. Did you notice that change as well?
Yeah, so that, I think still today, is one of the biggest issues that companies in Japan, and any company in Japan has to face, which is the universities and high schools aren't preparing people for a career in a global economy the way other schools are in other countries. And still in schools in Japan today, again in university and in high school, it's about learning information, about cramming information. Nobody asks questions. There's no debates. There's no you're not taught to stand up and take care of yourself. It's about gathering information. So people know a lot, but and I'm not talking about language here. They don't know how to express themselves and make a point, or have a point of view on something the way many other competitive markets do. And that's okay if you're not going to be a global player and you're just going to stay in your own little market. But as you know today, Greg, that's impossible. That whether you're a small domestic retailer or a giant multidimensional corporation, global reach is going to impact you no matter what.
Yes.
So,
and you need people who are ready to be part of that. And I think also that Yutori Sedai thing is around commitment to work, a little bit different. I notice that the younger people have got a different concept around work and the importance of work and their commitment to work compared to a little bit older generations who they're really, work is like, that's the main thing. But the younger people seem to be thinking that's one of the things, but it's not the only thing, and trying to get them to embrace the direction of the company, policies change, getting to become engaged. It seems to me anyway, it's much harder than maybe dealing with previous generations. When they signed on, they signed on. This generation seems to be a bit more like, yeah, okay, I'll have a look at this. And if it doesn't really suit me, well, I'll just go and do something else, because that job mobility, that fluidity in the market exists now. And particularly for an English speaker, they're just not printing as many English speakers here as they used to, because they're not going overseas to study anymore. So the whole population pool of young people is coming down dramatically. It's halved in the last 20 years between ages about 15 and 34. And then it's going to halve again over the next 40 years. But the numbers going overseas to study, doing 4-year degrees, has really come down, and they're going for more truncated periods. So it's a lighter touch, less cultural immersion, less linguistic ability coming out of it. And yet, at the same time, Japan must globalize to survive, because the domestic market is shrinking, and they can't survive here with just that. They've got to have a global market. So you've got this Japan Inc. needs young people to be global, but young people are like, forget that, I'm staying here. So, and I notice it with the younger people, they're much, in many ways, they're much more challenging to lead. But how has your experience been?
Yeah, I think that's the case. First of all, the change in attitude among young people entering the job market, I think around the world, has changed as well. So, I think particularly with millennials and then generations after that, the attitude of, sacrificing your life for your career and everything else will follow after that is history. In Japan, as you know very well, that was, so intense. Now, in Japan and around the world, is people are balancing things and looking that there's a different set of priorities, and people are willing to move. And, when you think about the technology, and now even, thanks to COVID, the idea of a more dispersed organization, and still operating, is now, I think, here to stay. There'll be a good blend, I think, once, people go back to office at least sometimes, but certainly not all the time. So that also has an impact. So it all sort of converges together. Greg, I don't think it's just this younger generation in Japan, but for them in particular, they have this sort of cynical heritage of learning in school to just sort of do what you're told and accumulate to absorb information. Then they come out of school and they're not prepared, and they think, okay, if the company's not going to take care of me, then I don't need to take care of it, and I'll see what's in it for me. So it's almost a selfish point of view, I guess, in a way, kind of defensive. So I think the trick for any company leader today, whether it's a Japanese company or a Gaishke, is how to get this generation coming up now to be believers again in company culture and in what the vision of the company is. So company purpose is more important than ever.
Yeah, you probably saw that change too when we started working from home, from when we're in the office. So automatically, Japan is a very group-oriented culture. And so suddenly you've broken the group up and you've dispersed them to their homes, which again is, from a leadership point of view, quite challenging, but also particularly challenging when you have to onboard people during that COVID period where they're not actually going to the office because there's nobody there, fundamentally. And you certainly aren't there. And I don't know whether you experienced that part of leading before you relocated back to Canada, but I certainly found we're pretty good on continuing the culture. We're pretty good on that. But for those who were new, trying to onboard them was very, very, very challenging, and to get them into the culture of the group and make them feel, part of the group, and also to educate them and to train them. Tough, very, very tough. And I'm sure many companies, had the same problem. Is that something you experienced, or had you sort of managed to go beyond that and avoid that fate?
And no, there's no magic solution to that. It was definitely an issue, and onboarding new people, making them feel and understand what the company's all about, was very difficult. And actually, I think they were shortchanged compared to previous people, like when I first started with the company, or people that started, prior to COVID. So I think in post-COVID, there's probably some repair work to do with those specific people. You could try hard online, and we had all sorts of Zoom parties or team parties and virtual drinks and all that sort of stuff, and it's great, but it's not the same as just sort of being there and feeling the people around you, as opposed to just seeing little squares and little boxes of people on a screen.
That's absolutely true. So we better update things a bit here. So we've jumped from Saatchi and Saatchi to COVID. There's been quite a few things that happened in between. So just give us a quick snapshot of what happened after Saatchi and Saatchi.
So after I left Saatchi and Saatchi, I wanted to do something adjacent to advertising, but that would also open up some new learning opportunities for me. And I became head of a strategic design company and part of the global board of a company called didnt, which focuses on strategic design and innovation, particularly in, they did a lot of product development, but also a lot of service management. And that was a great experience. And that led to me becoming a partner at KPMG for digital transformation. And that I thought was going to be my last career move in Japan. So a partner at KPMG was, I think, a really great way of sort of capping off my career, because it moved from just creating advertising content to actually helping companies transform their businesses into different or changing entities. And I was actually set to leave Japan 3 years ago. And I was starting to make arrangements to do this. And then somebody reached out to me and asked me to, if I'd be interested in talking to Phillip Morris. And I thought this was a really unique perspective for someone to come and talk to me, because I was a non-smoker, or am a non-smoker. And I thought, shouldn't they get someone who really, from their industry? But Phillip Morris had actually made the decision several years ago to move from the cigarette business to heat not burn, which is up to 95% reduced risk compared to people who smoke just cigarettes. So this, and they asked me if I'd be interested in being head of marketing communications. And for me, this was like an ultimate challenge, because it's about company transformation for itself. So it's changing fundamentally what products that they're selling. It's about changing an industry, because they are such big players in the industry, and it's about having a huge impact on the consumers. Because if you can get someone to switch from smoking cigarettes to heat not burn, you can reduce their risk by a tremendous amount, and also it allows them to, I think, participate in society in many ways where smokers had sort of felt sort of shut out of things, because they had to leave a conversation to go outside and have a cigarette, or they couldn't smoke around other people when people are eating, or so on and so on. So it was a fundamental change for the industry, for the business, for consumers. And I thought, given my background, this was just a phenomenal opportunity to be part of. So we decided to stay in Japan a bit longer, and I spent time helping Phillip Morris get to the next level of changing their business model.
Yeah, and thinking about that, you've gone from Saatchi Saatchi to design to KPMG, now Phillip Morris. How do you go about building trust with teams? Because these are all new teams. You're coming into, now you're a long time there with Saatchi and Saatchi, so you can build trust over time. Being there for quite a number of years, you can build trust over time. But we're in short spaces where you are moving. But how do you go about building trust with teams?
So part of it is what you avoid doing as well as what you do. And one of the things to avoid is making big grandiose speeches about this big vision that you have and how you're going to totally change this and all that sort of stuff. Because for the most part, people tend to look at that and think, yeah, it's just a lot of wind, or it makes them feel very unsafe. And if people, aren't feeling stable and unsafe, what happens? Their performance goes down, and also they'll consider looking at other opportunities. So the first thing I think you want to do is listen to people and understand. Everybody knows what the company business plan is. So you need to make sure that you're talking within those parameters. But let's hear what your management team has to say. Then also hear what their team members have to say, so that you can catch the nuances. There was, I had Toyota as a client at Saatchi Saatchi for many years, and one of the famous sayings at Toyota for managers was "Genshi Gembutsu," right? Go see for yourself. And you can do that from a office point of view as well. Like, don't wait for a management staff meeting to tell you what's going on in the company. Go, sit in the desk next to somebody and talk with them and catch up with them in the cafeteria and have a coffee, and just on an ongoing basis. I mean, it's hugely time consuming, but that's where you really get the pictures of what's going on, and also they could see you for who you are, and that's what starts to build trust. So I think the basics of trust tends to be about communication, two-way communication. And even if somebody disagrees with what you say, if they understand where you're coming from, they're usually willing to at least go along with it or offer advice to how to make it better.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. You made a good point about that communication with people, but I also think to myself, we're all running around with mobile phones. We've got amazing technology today. It is all supposed to make our lives easier and give us more time. I don't think I've got more time. I just think I've found more ways to pack stuff into the same amount of time I had before, and I don't feel that I've got a margin anymore. So when you talk about going and spending time with people, I think for leaders, we are busier. This complexity of business is there, the speed of business is there. These are driving us. And so time usage becomes even more critical. So many more meetings, if it's on Zoom or it's physical before, just driving yourself meeting to meeting, and so many things to do if you're a global organization, reporting, and it's quite complex. So how do we actually make that time? Because we, as you say, we might salute the idea in theory. That's a very good idea. Management by wandering around. I think I read that in a book somewhere. I'll go and do that. But do the people actually ever get around to doing it? So how do we actually make sure we do it, Phil?
Yeah, so what worked for me, and maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but what works for me is to systemize it. So, I scheduled my time to make room for that it had to happen. And I gave it as much a priority as I did other things. Because what I found the trade-off was if I had a motivated team or a team that really understood what our purpose was and also what our short-term goals were and, all the rest of it, then they performed better. And I didn't have to keep a close eye on them, so I can go on and do other things. So, it's leading, but it's managing. It's, giving people the opportunity to perform and do the stuff that they should be doing because they feel confident and can trust you're their leader, that you're going to be there for them and you're going to support them and you're going to guide them when needed.
So thank you. And what about in terms of, we've talked about number of companies you've been in, different aspects of leadership. Are there any things about leadership that I haven't asked you, Phil, which I should have?
Well, you touched very briefly on, like the speed of things that are going on right now. And I think a big leadership challenge in Japan is there's still a big cultural bias to first saying no to everything as opposed to saying yes. And, the brakes immediately go on with any new idea. And the amount of time that it takes to bring an idea from, start to finish. In Japan, it always took longer. And in fact, in Japan, in business in general, I think a great catchphrase for Japan business is, it takes longer. Because in every aspect of business, people expect a higher degree of service, a higher degree of details, a higher degree of more upfront effort put into something to get it almost perfect, and then to implement. And if you think about the way business is going today in terms of the way technology is developed and implemented, it's actually the opposite, where things are put into market that are, still quite beta, where things they know aren't quite baked, and they know that, and people are buying them knowing that it's not quite right, but that it's going to get better as they go on. So there's a real, it's not really matching up now what Japan's way of business has been to what, because of the global pressure on things, the way it is going to be and is actually right now in the future. And on top of that, there's a matrix organization for almost every international company nowadays. So that adds yet another layer of complication that, again, is at odds with the traditional Japanese way of doing business.
And you made a point there about acceptance of substandard product defects, errors that people at the buying end will put up with as part of the process of having speed and having new products come on and we buy that. Except in Japan. I mean, in this country, no errors allowed, no defects allowed, no mistakes allowed. So that culture, I don't see changing anytime soon. So I can see that the rest of the world can be quite experimental and moving quite quickly. But just culturally, I just cannot see Japan able to replicate that in a domestic market. And whether they psychologically can take that concept and then implement it in markets outside of Japan or not, I don't know. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue. And I think the solution lies in a more of a strategic design approach to business, which is that nobody likes risk, especially when stakeholders have their shares and their money at stake, and so on and so on. Everybody wants a sure thing. So regardless of what market you're in, you want to mitigate risk. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a lot of little experiments up front where you make all your mistakes, where it's okay to make the mistakes, it's okay to fail, because it's part of the process, knowing that downstream it's going to be perfected. So if companies can take that approach that was originally for product design and for software design and apply it as a business model, I think it can help take the stress that people have, particularly in Japan, of wanting to avoid making a mistake or think they're going to be punished if something goes wrong or a project doesn't go well, because that becomes part of the process up front. And then as it gets closer and closer to launch and better refined, risk is more mitigated and the chances of success are that much better. So I think that approach to leadership could be a big benefit to almost any company in Japan.
So Phil, how did you handle mistakes? Because we, as leaders, we accept that we have to have experimentation, innovation, creativity, which are messy processes. They're not perfectly formed at the beginning. to get to a refined state. And so we have that. But as we talked, Japan doesn't have that concept of you can make mistakes. You are not allowed to make mistakes. So how did you deal with mistakes and try and bolster that creative side of the business?
Sure. I think, comes back to the trust question that you asked earlier. And that is, if you define the process and you show where mistakes are allowed to happen, like at the early onset of a project and during the experimentation phases and the testing phases, and that mistakes are welcome, in fact, expected. And then once something launches, if there is a problem, you as the leader have to take responsibility for it. And people have to know, your team has to know that you've got them covered and that you're not going to be, pointing fingers or anything like that. You take responsibility. And also, when things go well, you need to, I'm sort of a big believer in servant leadership. You need to make sure that the team who did the work and the people who put in the time, that they get the credit, not you. And that is a bit of a challenge, I think, with sort of a classic expat position or someone who's coming, as part of a multinational to spend a few years in Japan. They don't want to make a mistake because they're looking for their next opportunity in the next market. And also, it's easy to say, well, that wasn't me, that was the team that was already here, or something like that. If you do that, you will never get their respect and never get their trust, and they won't work hard for you. So you need to make it very clear up front what the process is, where errors are expected and where mistakes can happen, and why that's safe to do it then. And then also you need to follow through and make sure that you take responsibility for the project if things go poorly.
So, you've spent a long time in Japan, you speak Japanese, you're very comfortable, you've now moved back home to Canada. But if you were going to give some advice to an executive who's not familiar with Japan, doesn't speak the language, who's going to be sent on a posting to Japan, we've covered a number of things already, but what would be some key advice that you'd have for that person?
And two or three things come to mind. One is know that things are going to take longer than what you expect. So give yourself some extra timeline, both in terms of the project itself, but also in terms of getting into the pace of the organization. It's really hard in a company that's run more domestically in Japan to hit the ground running and to get instant results as you can in some other markets. So that's one. Two is really take the time to understand all the stakeholders. It's not just your boss, it's not just the person that you report to overseas, and it's not your immediate reports. Get to know all of them, because then you'll really start to see the whole picture. Another one is, don't come here thinking that you know all the answers and that you're going to teach people something. I mean, that's irritating in any market, but particularly in Japan, because again, it's a very well-defined, well-entrenched culture, both as a country and then also as a business entity. So you want to make sure that you're being sensitive to the local way of doing things, but also not become local. So you don't all of a sudden want to be the person who is, especially if you're a foreigner, coming here and trying to be Japanese, because you can't, and you won't get any credibility. So just be yourself, be sensitive, and take the time to really get to know the situation and all the stakeholders involved.
Should they learn Japanese, Phil?
It depends on the amount of time that they're going to be here. I think it's just polite and common sense to learn some basics so people see that you're making a sincere effort. But I think if you're here on a 2 or 3 year assignment, I don't think people expect you to start speaking Japanese in a few months. If you're coming here to make a career in Japan, then I think before you get serious into work and before you get to serious levels of management, take the time to learn Japanese first, so that you don't have to struggle with it and try to do your job at the same time.
It's always a bit of an irony, though, isn't it? Because you think, I'm only going to be in Japan for 2 years, so I don't have to worry about the Japanese language. And 24 years later, you're still here and you still haven't learned Japanese. I meet tons of foreigners like that, actually, they've never thought they're going to be here forever. Actually, that's how it turned out.
Absolutely. My Japanese, I'm a source of entertainment for my wife, who's Japanese, and for all my Japanese friends.
Yes, my son keeps reminding me how poor my Japanese is. Dad, your Japanese is terrible. Luckily for him, he was born here. But any other words of advice for people going to make that big plunge and come to Japan?
I think if you just stay open-minded and just be yourself, I think you can really enjoy yourself in Japan. It's an amazing culture. It's an amazing business society. I think you can probably learn as much as you can depart knowledge to the people that are there. And it's something that, now this is my second time leaving Japan. I find the lessons, even in my new life here, the lessons from Japan still are relevant to daily business here.
Well, on that note, let me say thank you very much. It has been a fantastic chance. We didn't get a chance to do it while you were physically here in Tokyo, but we're doing the next best thing. And as I say, this is a first. I've never done any interviews on Zoom before for this particular program. So this is a historical occasion. But I do thank you for taking the time. I know you've probably got many things to do there, but let me thank you very much. And everyone, please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.